We are beginning a new unit today on inequalities. Inequalities, remember, that's talking about our less than, our greater than, our less than or equal to, our greater than or equal to. Those, oops, you can't see that. Those are for inequality signs. And sometimes people include the equal sign. That is an equality, not an inequality. But how do we solve inequalities? Well, let's look at our first example. We have 3g is greater than negative 21. So we're trying to figure out what types of numbers would make this true for g. So if I were to substitute different numbers for g, what would make this true? Now, in order to figure out what those numbers are, we're going to continue to use the inverse operation, okay? So if we were to pretend that this is an equal sign, we have one side of the inequality and the other side of the inequality. If I'm solving for g here, this 3 is attached by multiplication. If I want to get g by itself, I have to do the opposite. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide by 3, multiplication, multiplying by 3, dividing by 3, that cancels out. But if I do it on one side, I have to do it on the other side to balance the inequality. So here I'm left with g is greater than, and then negative 21 divided by 3. Well, 21 divided by 3 is 7, so negative 21 divided by 3 is negative 7. So this inequality says that g can represent anything that's greater than negative 7. And let's go ahead and let's test this out. Let's think of a number that's greater than negative 7. Now remember, negative 7 on the number line, if this is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, there's negative 7. So greater than negative 7 is moving towards these positive numbers, right? These are all positive over here. These are all negative over here. So greater than negative 7 is actually going to be up this way. Let's pick 0. 0 is greater than negative 7. Let's see if that, well, 0 is kind of a funky number. 0 works. Let's choose a different one. Let's say positive 1. Okay, positive 1 is right here. It is greater than negative 7. If I were to substitute positive 1 for g, that means 3 times 1 is 3. Is 3, positive 3, greater than negative 21? Yes, it is. So that makes this inequality true. So all of the responses for g just have to be greater than negative 7 to make this true. Okay, so our final answer would be g is greater than negative 7. Let's move on to another example just to get some practice. Here we have 2 divided by q is less than or equal to 7. Now we're dividing by q here, okay? So this one is actually a little bit funky because usually we don't divide by a variable. But in order to move through this, we're going to have to actually move the variable. So if we have 2 divided by q, if I were to multiply by q on one side and multiply by q on the other side, these q's cancel out. And now I have 2 is less than or equal to 7q. That's going to be easier to solve because here our 2 is on top, it's not on bottom, so it makes it harder to work with. But here, this is the same thing as we just moved q. 2 is less than or equal to 7q. So now if we're wanting to solve for this q, I'm going to need to divide by 7 and then divide by 7. These 7s cancel out. So now I have 2/7 is less than or equal to q. So that means that q just has to be greater than or equal to any number that's greater than or equal to 2/7. So it could be 2/7, or it could be a number greater than that. Inequalities are very simple. You don't actually have to come up with an exact number because inequalities, multiple numbers could work because there's lots of numbers on the number line. Okay. when a number is greater than another number or a number is smaller than another number, there's lots of different numbers that could represent that. So that's why we leave it like this. All right, just for some more practice, here we have x plus 15 is greater than negative 30. To get x by itself, I'm going to subtract 15 from both sides. These cancel out. X is now greater than, well, let's see, negative 30 minus 15 or plus a negative 15. Negative 30 plus negative 15. Those are both negatives. That comes out to a negative 45. So x is greater than negative 45. And our last one, we have negative 5j is less than 25. To get j by itself, I need to divide by negative 5, divide by negative 5, j. 25 divided by negative 5 is negative 5. Now, notice I skipped putting the sign there. Here's a rule that we have to remember. When you multiply or divide by a negative number, the sign flips. When you multiply or divide by a negative number, the sign flips. So this one reads negative 5j is less than 25. We're going to flip it to j is greater than 5. And if you're like, what? Why do we just do that? That seems like a random rule. Well, we actually talked about this for multiple lessons back in January. I'm going to see for a second if we have that lesson here. I don't know if we will. Percents, we did lots. Oh, here's our geometry. Aha, inequalities. Yes, we did an example. Okay, let's go over this real quick. Wow, this was back in December, before we knew that our lives would change. All right, so we had negative 3, obviously is less than 5. If we were to, let's say we multiplied both of these by 2. Well, negative 3 times negative 2, that actually becomes a negative times a negative is a positive. So if we multiplied by a negative 2, that becomes a positive 6. But if we multiply 5 times a negative 2, that becomes a negative 10. 6 is greater than negative 10. So because we multiplied by a negative times a negative is a positive. So this number is actually bigger. That's why the sign flipped. Let's see what happens here. Let's say we just divide by positive 1. Okay, if we divide by a positive, the sign shouldn't flip. So let's say again we have negative 3 and we divide by 1. Well, that stays as negative 3. If we have 5 divided by negative 1, that stays as 5. Negative 3 is less than 5. But let's say we divide by a negative 1. Negative 3 divided by negative 1, a negative divided by negative is a positive. Okay, 2 negative signs, when we divide, makes a positive. 5 divided by negative 1, now this becomes a negative 5. 3 is greater than negative 5, so the sign flipped. Hopefully that refreshes your memory just a little bit. If not, message me and let's do some tutoring sessions.